This is an introduction to the Pro Editor, which you'll be using on your WordPress site to create and edit pages. When you edit a page, you'll have a choice of three editors. The visual editor is a word processor style interface. The text editor is an HTML editor. And the Pro Editor, which is what we'll be talking about now, is a drag and drop editor that allows you to create pages that have more flexibility than these other two editors here. When you get to a page that you want to edit with Pro, switch to this tab and click the Edit with Pro button. Once the Pro editor is loaded, you're ready to start building your page. The first thing you'll want to do is add a section by clicking this button over here. The section appears on the right side of the screen. And as you move around that side of the screen, you'll notice the items you hover over will highlight to indicate what is under your cursor. If you were to click that item, that's the item you would take control of and begin editing. This is the section we just added. Sections contain rows, at least one, but as many as you need. And finally, each row contains columns. You'll pick your columns by selecting one of these icons, but you can change the number later if you need more or less. So if I click that, you now see we have column 1 and column 2. Columns are where the elements are added to the page. You'll notice that when we added the columns, the left side of the screen switched to the Inspector tab. There are actually three main tabs. First is the Layout, and this provides a visual representation of the page itself. So scrolling down the list, you can see it's highlighting on the right which one you're currently selecting. And each item has 4 icons attached to it. The magnifying glass is an inspector, so it'll take you right back to that tab. The plus sign will add an item of the next lower type on this list. So a section would add a row, and a row would add a column. So if I click this, we now have a second row added, which is waiting for a column selection to be made. Finally, we have the duplicate icon, which will duplicate everything in the item, and the delete icon, which will remove it and ask for confirmation before it's thrown away. The next tab is the Elements tab. This tab contains all the items that you can place onto a page. In order to place the item, you simply click it and drag it over to the page and drop it in a column. So we'll add a text item, grab it, and drag it, and release. And the item drops in with some placeholder text, and the tab switches to the Inspector. The Inspector panel shows the details of the element that we're currently working with and allows us to change the appearance of that element. Right now we're seeing the details for the text element we just added. You can look at the top bar here to see exactly which element you're currently working with. If we were to click on the column, the details over here would change to show the column settings. The contents of this panel will vary based on the element you're working on, but there's a few things you can always expect to see. The duplicate and delete buttons work exactly the same as we saw in the layout. And you'll have the ability to use presets. A preset allows you to save all the settings for the element you're working on and then apply those to another element of the same type. This is especially handy if you're going to use the element throughout your site and you don't want to have to rebuild it every time you use it. The Setup section is the first section that you'll find unique items for your element in. Since we're working with a text element, this is where you'll actually edit your text. Another thing you'll find in the Setup section is the ability to add a background color. The margin and the padding have to do with spacing on the element. To demonstrate this, let's duplicate the element. We'll give it a different background color. Margin adds spacing around the element, and it's used to control its position relative to other items on the page. So in this case, if we add a top margin, it pushes the item away from the element above it. The padding adds spacing to the element's container. As you can see here, the text is very close to the edges of its container. If we were to give it some padding, that pushes the content away from the edges and loosens it up a bit. The next section allows us to add a border. And the border radius adds a curve to the corners of the content container. We can add a box shadow to the element. And now we've gotten to the unique section for the text element. These are all the controls you'd expect to see for text, font families, and weights. And finally, a text shadow. Now let's go ahead and add another image so you can see how the panel changes. We'll go ahead and add an image element. Select from the Elements tab and drop it. And you can see this section has remained the same, but the setup section has changed slightly, and there's now an image section. This is where we'll click to pick an image. And the rest of these sections are the same that we saw in the text element. When you've completed the edits to your page, you'll want to save it. The Save button is on the lower left side of the screen. Clicking it will display a message in the upper right that your page has been saved. If you'd like to see what the page looks like to a user of the site, click this icon and it'll open up a new tab and display the page without the editor.